All right, thank you all for coming. My name is Sarah Nuse, and I'm Casey. We work for Big Blue Sky Games. We recently released a game, Merchants of Rosewall, that we built in Godot. And our talk is about cross-team collaboration, why it's important, how to do it, some of the pitfalls, and some advice that hopefully you guys can take advantage of. So first off, why should you even try to get your team members in line? One big thing is when a teammate understands more about the implementation pipeline, they can make more informed decisions about their work. It gives teams more flexibility in how work is allocated. Engineers don't have to be responsible for every single thing that touches the engine. And one of the biggest things to me is that it's empowering to people. It's really, really good for morale, for people to be able to own more of their process. And morale is very important to protect in an industry like ours. There are some challenges to getting no-code developers working in the engine. Game engines are scary. There is a lot to them. They take a lot of dedicated time to learn. They also have a really broad feature set. So an artist who's just looking to swap out some assets, they're going to need some guidance in figuring out exactly where to go to do that, how to check that it's working. And from what we've heard, people are afraid they're going to break something. In my experience, there's two kinds of people when they're approaching software they don't understand. Either they'll just start clicking buttons because they want to get it over with, or they'll ask you 5 times before they click anything because they don't want to break anything. So in order to get people working in the engine with you and confidently, they have to get past that fear. Before we continue, I have an important note. It's a note about version control. You have to use version control. If your team size is greater than or equal to 1, you need to be using version control. None of what you're going to hear in this presentation today is going to be relevant at all if you're not using version control. It goes back to Sarah's earlier point about people being afraid to break things. If they're able to break things, they're going to be afraid to. They're not going to go near the engine. So make sure you use version control before you try to get a team going. Now we can move on to Godot's really easy to use. It's easier than you think to onboard people to Godot. And that's thanks to nodes. Our friends nodes. Nodes are what make Godot Godot. Game engines have a lot of moving pieces. They make it really tough to parse what's going on sometimes. But nodes are a really simple, straightforward concept. They're little pieces that stack up to create things that are a lot more complex. Each node still retains its own small piece of functionality that makes it really easy to understand what the node is contributing. And nodes behave consistently throughout the engine, which is really useful because everything is a node in Godot. So once you understand a little bit about nodes, you're already on your way to understanding other things about the engine. There aren't a lot of here's a weird exception about this one thing. There's not a lot of that in Godot because of this. And all of these things together mean that it's a lot easier than some other programs to be able to onboard someone to the basics contained in a lot fewer concepts. And thanks to nodes, we have the scene tree. Just about everything you need in a scene lives in the scene tree. You can look at the scene tree and really quickly get a rough understanding of the way that the scene works without having to inspect each and every node. Because nodes are small and their functions are really specific, you don't get these single massive objects that are trying to do a ton. So everybody lives on the scene tree together in harmony. Also, as a bonus, scene tree also gives you some other useful properties of a node at a glance, like scripts, groups, signals, a little warning symbol if they think that something's wrong with your node, even if they're wrong sometimes. Okay. A huge thing for me is that creating a really neatly nested hierarchy in Godot does not tank your performance. You can set up your scene tree in a way that makes full use of parent-child relationships, making it neat, clean, easy to navigate. I'm gonna pick on Unity here a little bit, just to show the contrast. For clarity, Unity that has game objects as their kind of node equivalent, so to speak. And you have to do a lot of clicking when you're in the hierarchy to click through and see like what each game object does. You can end up with these really heavy lifting game objects that are doing a ton of work that's kind of hidden from like your overview of the scene. The other thing is in Unity, when you nest your scenes all nice and you try to be a good person for your coworkers, it tanks your performance. It's a lot better to just flatten your entire hierarchy and get some frames back, which isn't great for the developer experience. I got more about the scene tree. Some things about when you have these smaller nodes, your scene trees do get longer. There are more items on the list. It's more nested. It gets deeper. You do have to click into it a little bit. And the node names get silly. We have some node names that were like outer margin container holder 3. When you get really, really nested UI, it can get like that. But you deal with it because it's worth it. You can find everything you need right there in the scene tree. You can group up your pieces of functionality in a way that makes sense with parent-child relationships. You don't have to suffer through unorganized hierarchies. And there's way less clicking to find that one component that you need. By the way, I think it's Control-click or Alt-click in the viewport, and it drills all the way down to whatever it is that you're clicking on. So you don't have to like double-click a billion times to get down there. It's really nice. By the way, on Merchants, we worked with a really wonderful UI designer who had a lot of experience in other engines, and they loved Godot. It was like really straightforward to them. One of the pieces of feedback they gave was that it was so much easier to do their job without so many clicks. So what can we take away from Godot's ease of use? When you're onboarding your teammates to Godot, make sure to build a strong foundation by helping them understand the core concepts of nodes and the scene tree. Encourage them to download Godot. Look at your project, click around, explore things, hover over things, read some tooltips. When you already have that background that nodes are the core of Godot, it becomes a lot easier to navigate on your own. People can kind of safely experiment and be independent. This goes back to version control. Use version control so they can actually do that. And you can encourage teammates to do all this because the node concept is intuitive and it's baked in. It doesn't take a lot of instruction for a person to be able to learn by trying things out themselves. And you can help by being there with them when they get started so they can ask questions, so you can point them in the right direction.
So nodes are great. They're discrete. They're very clear in what they do, but they won't do everything for you. They are only going to get you so far. But Godot has a lot of built-in support for specialized workflows. One of the things that we use a lot is custom resources, especially for game content. Merchants is a crafting game. We use custom resources for the items, recipes, for upgrades, for NPCs. All of that was managed in custom resources. They're really nice because they act as a class and an object with all their fields exposed. So it's really quick to prototype content for your game. Once you create the item resource class, it's really fast to then create an item resource and fill in the information. And now you have items in your game that you can test with, even if they're not like the real items that you're going to use. If you have a small enough data set, you can kind of stop there and manage that stuff just with custom resources and manage the resources right in the engine. They're also object-oriented and relational without the rest of your team needing to understand at all what that means. So resources can inherit from other custom resources. They can hold references to other resources. So we have like a recipe resource that has a dictionary of item resources, for example. And so the people who are entering the content of the game don't need to care about what inheritance is or any of that. They just need to know I'm making an item resource. And you can make them even more user-friendly by scripting with tool logic. So that's the stuff that lets it show in engine while you're using it. For example, for our item resources, we could look up the item icon based off of the name. So when you're working in engine, you can see exactly, when you pull up that resource, there's the icon of the item. You don't have to guess what it is. And the files themselves are pretty much human readable, so that makes them especially easy to work with in scripting for larger data sets. So you can import and export from a CSV, for example, and turn them into resources pretty simply.
Godot has some of the greatest built-in types I've ever seen. So many just like solutions that are totally core to Godot that make it really, really easy to create and edit data without having to roll your own solutions for these things. You can add a curve property to a class to really easily just add a visual curve editor for your designers. They can do things like define how a value changes over time. All you have to do is add an export variable to your resource or node or whatever, and bam, it just appears. There are tons of other little things in Godot that have editors hidden in them. I'll take the texture 2D is a great example. If you put an export variable on something that's a texture 2D, it prompts you to create a resource that inherits from texture 2D. And if you decide to create let's say a gradient 2D, this is the picture on the right here, you get a gradient editor that is better than what you can find in Photoshop. And like most design tools, it's astonishing. You can, basic stuff like a solid color, obviously an existing texture in your file system, but also placeholder texture 2D. You can add, sometimes you just want a rect, but you don't want a texture there yet. When you're saving that for later, placeholder texture 2D, it's right there. It's right in the engine. It's incredible. These types give you really convenient ways to empower your teammates. They're all part of the vanilla Godot engine. They're already supported in core. There's no need to download an add-on for a lot of them. I could personally say as a UI designer, not having to break my workflow, go outside the editor to get gradients, not having to like go back to Figma or Photoshop or something, tweak something, re-export it, re-import it. It's awesome. Be able to mark some textures as I'm going to worry about this later using placeholder texture 2D. It keeps me in a kind of flow state when I'm designing. I feel like I can play around. I can iterate really quickly. I can get creative. For the sake of time, I'm not going to mention all the other mini editors that are available in Godot, but you should explore, find some for yourself. You should check out some node types and resource types that you've never used before. Put them in your scene tree, open them in the inspector. You might be surprised that they're really, really easy to use. And UI. I have to put something there about UI. Actually, the previous talk about Holy OS went into a lot of UI, and I agreed with so much of what they said. It was great. The UI design workflow in Godot, it really succeeds because it's so similar to the way that UI works in the mind of a UI designer. If you're familiar with building UI for web, Godot is actually really similar. It has a similar kind of like markup and theme and script like division between them. Common design tools like Figma are also based on web, so they map really, really well onto Godot. So the Figma to Godot pipeline is like, it feels very fast and easy to me. If you will indulge me, I have prepared a list of things that I like in Godot, which I will read quickly because that's not what this talk is supposed to be about. Control nodes are incredibly useful. They're tailored for UI design and quick UI iteration. There are a ton of different types of control nodes that when combined, they can achieve tons of functionality and really well-behaved scalable layouts without any code necessary. Their dimensions are decoupled from their scale, so it's really easy to animate and scale groups. Themes are super useful and accessible. The text support is actually amazing. It supports open type variable fonts. Whoever contributed that, thank you so much. And you can mask child canvas items to their parent. That is huge. If you know, you know, okay? My point is, you gotta get your UI designer in the engine, okay? You're not gonna regret it.
So the main takeaway from this is start with your coworkers' existing comfortable processes. Find out what their normal workflow is, and start from there. Use comparisons, use similar language and workflows to what they're already doing, and that's going to make them a lot more comfortable with actually getting in the engine and making changes.
Godot is great, but it can't do everything. I know. Sometimes you gotta make your own tools. In the places where out of the box Godot isn't serving your team's needs, you make tools and plugins to help bridge that gap. A wonderful thing about the Godot editor is that it runs on Godot. So if you're already familiar with Godot game development, you already have the skills to start developing your own plugins and tools. Though if you find out that a teammate has to go through some annoying steps over and over to get something done, classic way to get into tool development, that's the perfect place to develop a solution for them.
An example of a tool that we made, one of our engineers created a standalone Godot project that generates gradient resources. And then those gradient resources were used to map on a tone map shader so that they could play with color palettes and experiment and see it in the engine, how it's going to look, and then save those gradients out to be used in the project. And this was a standalone project, like I said, in Godot. And the reason we were able to build it is because of the built-in types that the Godot already has. They have a color picker. We didn't have to build a color picker. They have that gradient display that's built in. We didn't have to build it. So it makes making this kind of tooling really easy. And again, that's just going to get your no-code developers more comfortable being in an engine because like, oh, I know what color picker is. I know what a gradient is. Some other custom tooling that we built. I mentioned before import scripts for going from CSV to custom resources. So we had the people who were creating content would work in the CSV, save it off with a custom extension, and then we created an import script in Godot so that when that file gets imported into the project, it creates all of the custom resources, all of the items from that CSV. So if they're super scared of the engine or you have a large data set, they don't even have to touch it. We also worked in the asset library a bit. We found that the plugins that we were looking at weren't quite robust enough for what we needed, and sometimes were a few versions below. But they're a great place to start, to kickstart, if you have the capacity to build off of them and to kind of support it yourself. They're a good place to start. And also, like, over time, as the community, starts building more plugins and offering more support for them, that's going to be even more useful. So beyond the technology, beyond the nodes and the custom tooling, you have to put in processes to kind of make all this work. You can't really just tell your artists, start working in Godot. So let's talk about the processes that we put in place to support the whole team. I'll mention version control again. Don't make your team use command line. It's mean. They're not coders. They're not going to want to do it. Use a GUI. We use GitHub Desktop. But let them have pictures, let them have checkboxes. It's just not worth it. We also had a dedicated push to get everyone using Godot and version control. It wasn't just something that we tasked them to do. We had meetings about it. We just dedicated an hour and just got everybody to install Godot and version control and walked them through it. But it's also not a one and done. It's really important that as engineers, you're available, explicitly available, not just like, oh, if they have questions, they'll ask. Make sure that everyone's cool, and be non-judgmental. Like, they're going to commit things they didn't intend to commit. They're gonna roll back things they didn't intend to roll back. They're gonna see UID changes and freak out. Like, it's fine. Be non-judgmental when they're coming to you to ask questions, and make yourself available. A few more processes We had a really nice design to layout to implementation process. So designers could put together a scene in whatever design tool of their choice. And then second step, go into engine and lay it all out. And then the engineers could come in and add the functionality to it. Because the scene tree is so readable, like we had handoff meetings, but honestly, the scene tree communicates so much of what the functionality is supposed to be that a lot of times it was just like, okay, I see you want me to do this. You want me to do this? Yes, good. Yes. So, yeah, having those handoffs was really quick. Just as a shout out, we already mentioned we used GitHub Desktop, we used Figma, we used Yarn as ways to collaborate with people who aren't using code.
So whether you're using Godot or not, some things are always going to be helpful when you're working with a team. Communication is the number one biggest thing next to version control. As long as you're talking and being transparent and you're trying to understand each other's needs in earnest, you can make it work. Something that really helped us was treating documentation and pipeline development as a group activity. For this stuff, it's usually way more effective to get the relevant team members together in a room with a whiteboard or a virtual room with a virtual whiteboard and hash things out together. It's way more effective to do that than it is to go solo. The engineer develops a pipeline and then checks with the artist to see if that's fine, passing things back and forth. It's just never as effective as just getting in there and getting it done. Try to frame your mindset around what a new teammate would need to understand the process you're creating. Make step-by-step guides, use screenshots to lock down the process. And even if you're not planning to add new teammates, you should do it for yourself because we all have bad days. We're all a little bit new sometimes. You should encourage teammates to be vocal about what's not working for you. This is really important. You should create a culture of open communication and making sure that if somebody thinks that someone else can help them, they talk about it because maybe you can help. You should do the same thing too. Technical users are also part of the pipeline. I'm talking to the technical users here, of course. You should lead by example. Make sure that if the artist isn't giving you the assets that you need, if you have to do the same, shave off a couple pixels to make it 256 by 256 every single time, communicate that to the artist. Maybe they don't know. Maybe they can help you and kind of fulfill that end of the pipeline. And that's it. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. Looks like we have a lot of time for questions.
Maybe regarding like me midpoint for like pouring levels errors.
We have a tragic lack of wisdom. Or it's like wisdom that was way too hard earned. And it's like we didn't get enough wisdom out of the amount of time we spent learning it. We did not use, I would say import scripts are going to be really key to helping out 3D, your artists do 3D imports because you can do a lot of customization there. Our 3D artists have to do so much like just changing material settings every single time they did an import. And we could have helped them. We could have done that automatically with an import script. We just did not have time. So I would say import scripts are going to be your friend.
Two questions. Who's about? I'm just curious, how many artists do you have per?
I would say between like 3 and 5, like on and off. Scale is not a challenge as long as you are very clearly defining what each person is working on at a given time, which I guess is a challenge unto itself. So yes, it is challenging. Yeah, we were able to kind of say, I'm going to own this thing. I'm going to own this scene. Everybody else stay away from it. And then we would announce when we commit something or we're ready to head it off. We try to be really hygienic kind of about who's working on what.
That is a question. Sounds like folks were on me or visit. Any this, bro.
Anything I missed from Unity? I miss the plugin environment. I miss having a really big, old, like package store where I could just go and find something. Godot, we're gonna get there. I believe.
I would say it's not something that I miss, but something that took me a while to get used to in Godot was that every node does one thing. Like in Unity, you can just toss on components and components to an object and have it do a million things. And like that broke my brain. And then when I went into Godot and I was like, well, but how do I add more to this? Like, well, no, you just add another node. Like, so that was a workflow thing that took me a while to get used to. But like I said, I don't think I miss it because it is nice to have discrete nodes like that.
Do you mind describing your Figma to Godot workflow, and are there any like tips or gotchas?
Yeah, the gotcha is that Figma secretly is component based, but you can make it node based. You'll have to say you had a frame in Figma selected. There are a lot of things like the drop shadow, for instance, that are just a property of that frame or that object in Godot. Things like drop shadow, a lot of effects and borders, a lot of the stuff that you're going to have to break out into its own node and then parent it to whatever. So again, this is it's about making more and more and more nodes and glomming them on to a single object to make it as to establish like visual parity with the figs on. I'd say that's my biggest tip is like, don't subscribe to the Figma layer structure. Subscribe to what it's actually doing.
And so you have to sort of recreate, like there's no direct export, it's basically creating it in Figma and then recreating it in the engine.
Yes, exactly. Maybe one day we can do it because it feels really straightforward.
I think there is a tool that lets you export from Figma to Godot.
Okay, I'm gonna have to look into that because that would make my life a lot faster.
What's up here, last question? Were there any tools in Godot you discovered as a theme that helped with some sort of cross-disciplinary implementation, like with art or audio or whatever?
I think it was the custom resources. Honestly, I remember we realized like, oh, like we can just make resources for like anything and then just create a resource in the engine. Like that, when we realized that really sped up our workflow, I think.
Also, shouts out GodotShaders.com. Incredibly useful. If that's a tool that, we use that a lot. All right, that's it. Thank you so much, everybody.